Hello everyone. Okay, just look roughly here. Yeah, okay, for everyone online. Okay, no problem. So as stated, I'm Tom Grant. I've just completed the first year of my PhD at University of Portsmouth, and I'm here just to share with you some preliminary results from my studies. So just to kind of give a scope to the project, the key aims and objectives are to link the 3D features of damage zones in volcanic rocks to the seismic characteristics of volcanotectonic and long period seismic signals in particular, and then to test the generations of these signals with respect to the 3D microstructures and fluid pressure decompression, and then in time investigate the attenuation and crack resonance in volcanoes and volcanically active areas by new computational modelling, but also with seismic source modelling. So for a little bit of background, of course, this is a schematic view from Benson et al, as you can see. I should use the mouse as well. And in this shallow sort of region here, the current hypothesis is that pressure and stress fluctuations acting upon the rock units that surround the conduit itself will open up fracture pathways in which hot fluids and hot material will then infiltrate, and then in those spaces and in those cracks and fractures, those fluids will cause something called crack fluid resonance, and that resonance is thought to be the main cause of long period seismic events. And so for studying in the lab and modelling this in the lab, the current thought is that if we were to combine the acoustic emission signals, which is the lab analog of these seismic signals, with imaging data, that we can better understand the source mechanisms of these events. So in the lab, the rock mechanics lab of University of Portsmouth, we have a custom triaxial deformation rig, where we apply axial stress and confining pressure to core samples of volcanic rocks. For my project, I'm using an intermediate porphyritic alkali basalt from Mount Etna, and this custom rig allows us to perform rapid fluid pressure decompression tests, inducing shear fractures upon the samples themselves in initial failure, and then to perform this fluid pressure decompression. And an archive data set of the Rock Mechanics Lab from FADCO 2017 will be reprocessed in this PhD alongside a new data set which will complement the archive data set by use of a new and updated form of acoustic emission sensors. So to explain triaxial deformation and acoustic emission a little bit more clearly, each experiment is broken down into 2 stages. So as you can see here, there's just as an example, each sample is 100 millimeters in length by 40 millimeters in diameter, and each one contains a pre-drilled conduit of 4 millimeters in diameter to allow for those pore fluids to be vented in stage 2. So during stage 1, the shear fracture stage, volcanotectonic or the lab analog of volcanotectonic signals in the form of acoustic emission signals are recorded when we apply axial stress and confining pressure. Microcracks will open and form within the sample until they eventually coalesce, causing this shear fracture. And then during the second stage of the experiment, pore fluids are then vented through the conduit, which is also quite deformed at this stage, alongside the fracture damage zone, which is then caused and formed by these cracks coalescing here, shown in yellow. And this is the interesting part of the experiment, where the analog of long period, also known low frequency seismic signals recorded by these very, very highly sensitive acoustic emission sensors housed around the sample. So to accurately understand what is happening on a microstructural level, I'm using X-ray computed tomography, also known as XCT, XRCT. This is, as you can see, a non-invasive method for microstructural analysis. Of course, with thin section petrology, we have to destroy the sample if we want to understand the microstructure. By using this method, we can avoid that, and then perhaps then only delve into thin section petrology if need be by destroying samples. So each scan will produce numerous 2D slices. Typically, depending on the resolution, it's typically around about 2,000 to maybe 3,000. And then what you can do is you can assemble all of these individual 2D slices to then create a 3D model. One limitation, however, is that with the size of my samples in particular, being 100 millimeters in length, that there is a slight cutoff point, and so the region of interest here shown in red has been selected because of the theorized interaction between the fracture damage zone and the pre-drilled conduit in each sample. So preliminary XCT results are shown to reinforce existing numerical models. Even at 25 microns, you can go much higher resolution to anywhere up to maybe 5 microns, for example. But at 25 microns, with such a porphyritic sample material, you can quite clearly see the microstructure and the subsequent damage to the microstructure. And so the fracture damage zone, which I mentioned earlier, shown here in this blue box area, and the yellow fractures as well. The fracture damage zone I've found so far from the preliminary results of these 2D XCT images directly interacts with the pre-drill conduit, causing deformation, which then causes high, severe shear deformation at that conduit. And the plan is to assemble these 2D slices into 3D models that can then be used in conjunction with acoustic emission data. So preliminary acoustic emission data, as you can see, the point source locations here of each acoustic emission, and it also quite accurately represents the shear fracture within the sample itself. And this was made possible by using a code in MATLAB, which was then translated into an open source software called Julia. And Julia can then be used with another software called ParaView, where you can very accurately visualize this seismic data. And as you can see here, there's in this 3D view, there is the conduit of the sample with large clusters of these signals interacting directly, as I said earlier, with that center conduit and causing that deformation. And that is where we think the long period earthquakes are occurring because of infilled sections, as shown previously on the slide. And in time, when 3D XCT models can be generated, the acoustic emission data will be superimposed over them to then link the likely source mechanisms to the 3D microstructure. And this will be made possible by attenuation models and seismic source modeling. So this is just for context, this is the hand sample here, and then after deformation, hand sample during deformation, the acoustic emissions were recorded, and then here on the left of the screen, there are just 3 snapshot images I chose to accurately represent where the fracture damage zone and the shear failure within the sample is in relation to those acoustic emission signals. And the plan is for year 2 and year 3 of my project to further develop these models and then apply seismic source modeling and tomographic attenuation for further investigation. So to conclude, as I say, to use the XCT and AE data jointly to create these sophisticated models, to then test the accuracy of these models and by comparing them to the tomographic and seismic source modeling that has been conducted in the past, specifically by Di Siena, as per their study of 2014 and then 2017, Di Siena et al., sorry. And then finally to compare the real lab fracture patterns of volcanic materials to the acoustic emission response on field seismic sequences. Sorry, field seismic sequences observed on active volcanoes. Yeah, I just want to point out some acknowledgements to people that really assisted during this first year. So, thank you very much.